You know what? I just think everybody down in Baton Rouge, anybody that bleeds the purple and gold or says go Tigers, that they're just happy that the season's over with. Final score out at NRG Stadium, 38-35 Houston, with all of its starters still in, with Willie Fritz taking the team to the next level, guarantees a 10-win season, and the Lane Kiffin era, technically, though really the Frank Wilson era that ends and now is going to change because he's going over to Oxford, ends in defeat against a Big 12 team. Let's talk about why this loss feels a little bit different than anything else in bowl season. Welcome on into SEC Unfiltered. It's Cole Thompson here. We showed on the show last night, had a couple of other things going on, but still want to get my thoughts out there, get thoughts on LSU moving forward. Make sure that you like the video, hit the ring notification, and subscribe to the channel because we talk SEC football daily. Download the podcast version of the show wherever you get your podcast listening systems. Follow us on the socials, link in the description, and check out all of our great work found at secunfiltered.com. And as always, we are proudly fueled by our friends over at FanDuel. Go visit FanDuel.com/SECU. Get started today with $300 in bonus bets when you win your first $5 bet simply by signing on up at FanDuel.com/SECU. Let's get this out of the way. This was not a fully prepared, fully bought in, and also fully determined LSU team going down to Houston. They had a lot of opt-outs. It was mightily clear going into the game that there were multiple players in the offensive line that were going to leave afterwards. They were missing some elements defensively. Did not have one of the best cornerbacks in college football. Did not have arguably the best safety we've seen come through LSU in a hot minute. 4 starters in the interior front 7 were out in this game. Multiple stars on the offensive side to side opt on out as well. You didn't have one of your star running backs. So there was a lot of things that LSU was already playing from behind with that made it seem like, hey, you're watching as somehow, some way, Connor Wigman slicing and dicing and picking you apart with 4 touchdowns. The reason why it's hard for me to give that excuse is because if you had a shot, if anybody pays attention to this game, LSU jumped up to a 14-0 lead, and they set the tone from the get-go. Barry Brown, it's a shame that we're probably not going to see him play again in college football because the second that he touched the field and had 2 returns for over 50 yards, you got to ask yourself, what had been the problem with special teams all season? That electric factory, not being able to make more of those highlight plays. Something wasn't cooking in the water properly. And so that's frustrating, but you saw that there was a team that did have an identity of, we're good enough. I don't think that we're going to be able to win an SEC title. We're going to make it to the college football playoff. But looking back at the season, some of the losses that we had, that's more so on us. And that's where this game went for me. From the standpoint of LSU. LSU goes down. They're down 21-14 at halftime. They start losing momentum again. They're down by a touchdown. They're down by 10 points going into the final 2 minutes. They move the ball emphatically down the field. Back to back. I mean, they get 2 touchdown drives in the fourth quarter. But they move it with tempo. 8 plays, 63 yards. And they don't have a lot of the penalty parts. They put themselves in a position where they looked like the more cohesive, balanced team. You're seeing Michael Van Buren make play after play. You're watching this Kyle Parker's making plays for the first time this season. You're seeing a lot more of the vertical passing attack, which I thought was really prominent this year. Getting the ball in the hands of Trey'Dez Green. Chris Hilton making a big 46-yard grab. You're seeing that on display, and they make it into the end zone. And here we are in a 3-point game. And now you need to get the onside kick. And you actually touch the ball on the onside. But you don't cover. Houston outlasts a banged up and slightly failed bought-in team. And they end up winning the game. Now, I want to give a lot of credit to Houston. I've seen the Cougars this season because I live in Houston. And I work for the radio station that covers the Cougars. They're a very solid team. What Willie Fritz has done in 2 years for a program that was losing interest, was losing NIL money, was not getting a lot of buy-in from the boosters, and certainly needed a complete 360 rejuvenation than what was being run underneath Dana Holgorsen. Credit where credit's due. The man is going to be a reason why we can talk about Houston as a prominent team going into the future of the Big 12. And Houston does have some very, very, very niche boosters who won't give a lot of money the way that LSU can just go funnel out $3 million, or Alabama, or I could even say, you go with teams like Michigan, USC, but they got some good players. I mean, they got some very, very high profile names that if they're willing to cut a check, That will be the difference of you landing a top 20 recruiting class and a top 15 recruiting class. That will be the difference of you going out and getting guys from UAB and Memphis and Kennesaw State to getting guys like from LSU that are entering the portal, to getting guys like from Alabama who are entering the portal. And they didn't view Houston as a primary destination because a lot of the names that we saw on yesterday's performance for Houston, they're all transfer portal players. Connor Wigman came on in from Texas A&M. Phenomenal day, 4 touchdown passes. He also ran for 56 yards. Dean Connors came on in from Rice. Tanner Koizil, their star tight end, came on in from Ball State and technically Wisconsin because he was a late addition from the spring transfer portal. Amari Thomas, who had 2 touchdowns on the day, and he was going to finish the year with a little bit under 1,000 yards, came from UAB. Like, this is the team that really targeted the right type of talent in the transfer portal and utilized that to its advantage to then take on over and put themselves in a position to where they were more solidly viewed in the public eye around the Big 12. Here's the problem. They, again, did not have any opt-outs. They realized that having a 10-win season in year 2 underneath a coach that is bought in for the long term is a good way to set the example of what are the expectations moving forward, especially in a conference that is always going to see overturn, whether that be BYU going from 11-2 to 5-7, whether that be Arizona being a 9-3 to 2-10. Like the Big 12 is America's favorite conference to watch because it's so unpredictable. And yet still last night, it was unpredictable because if Ramos makes the kick right before halftime, if I'm not mistaken, right before the closing minutes of the first half, guess what happens? Yeah, right. Yeah. You're tied 17-17. You're right before the end of the first quarter. My apologies. You're tied 38-38 going into overtime. And now momentum has gone all the way in favor of a team like LSU, and it's left the sideline for U of H. And I know that Frank Wilson's not a great head coach, and I understand there's a lot of people frustrated with how he benched Harlan Berry, and there were some very, very different decisions made in this game that I think that if you look back, you're going to say, this is where we really messed up. This is where we put ourselves in a position to where we couldn't be successful. This is where we knew the game was over. All things that you did, and yet you still were right there with a bunch of backups. I'm looking at it from the standpoint of knowing that you didn't have 7 starters on the defensive side, knowing that you didn't have your starting quarterback for weeks at this point, and maybe that was a good thing, maybe it wasn't. You didn't have half your coaching staff there, and yet still you went down to the wire with what was considered to be a very, very, very good Big 12 team in 2025. Oh, by the way, in their backyard where, yes, LSU people roam very freely around the greater Houston area, but it's U of H, and this is their Super Bowl. To be able to say that they could beat an SEC team. And in a game where a lot of people thought LSU had no shot because of how many opt-outs were coming from one side and how many weren't coming from the other. And it just goes back to the entire point that I think that we have all year when it comes to LSU. The self-inflicted wounds and the reason why the struggles occurred has nothing to do with the opponent that you faced. It has nothing to do with the people that you went up against during the regular season. It has everything to do with your identity. Honestly, could have run the football against Florida, nearly lost that game, struggled mightily in the second half to find any offensive success, nearly lost to Clemson, wasn't able to connect at any point for the Alabama game in the second half with Garrett Nussmeier or with Michael Van Buren. So you lose that game in a very, very, very underwhelming performance. That's it. You also weren't able to get the job done after having a great performance defensively up until the fourth quarter against Oklahoma. That's on you. Like none of that is on Houston, and none of that's on Bama, none of that's on Oklahoma. That's on you fundamentally being a disastrous team this year. And thankfully, the only beauty about anything that comes to this, you get to now say the season's over. Mercilessly, the season's over. And then people are going to ask you, well, what do you go ahead and change in the offseason? I don't know. There will be a lot of names that are going to enter the transfer portal, but I had this conversation with South Carolina fans earlier this week. I'll say it again. When you have an underwhelming season, like 4-8, nobody, and I mean nobody, is not replaceable. Well, that's South Carolina. This is a 7-6 season for an LSU team that many people in the public eye, not me, but still many people in the public eye, thought could win a national championship. At worst, they thought you're going to be 10-2 and you're going to be in the college football playoff. Folks, at that standpoint, nobody on this team is not replaceable. There's some names that you want to come back. Absolutely. Harlan Berry, I think, is one. I definitely think Trey'Dez Green working in a Lane Kiffin offense would be exciting to say the least. I think that there's some players defensively that you really like on the back end of your secondary that can make plays. You definitely got that, I think, in some bit of the trenches as well. There's names that I think that you want, but they're not replaceable. Again, Davin Keys, you probably want him back. I would want him back. He's a sophomore linebacker and he's a stud, but he's not replaceable. Losing a guy like DJ Pickett who had 7 tackles on the night, you probably want him back, and I would say he is a priority for Lane Kiffin to pay for it. But you went 7-6. Stop telling me that somebody is not replaceable on a team when it's 7-6. There's a reason that Brian Kelly was fired. He failed to meet the expectations. And again, it's more than just that, replacing players. It comes back to the areas of weakness that you had for yourself that allowed Houston to benefit off of you. How many penalties did you have on third down? How horrendous were you when it came to playing at the line of scrimmage? You look at the stat line. Oh, yeah, it's very fair that you say Houston beat us in almost every single category. They beat us in total yards. They beat us in third down execution. They were better on fourth down execution. They won the time of possession battle by 18 minutes. Guys, you had 9 penalties. They had 3. I mean, you had 6 of them on third down, if I'm not mistaken. And several of them gave a free set of downs to Houston. Like, you were not well prepared in that standpoint. And you hadn't been well prepared in multiple games this year. So the things that just are so detrimental to common success, they were not on display. And now you have to go back to the drawing board with Lane Kiffin in year 1 and say, what are the things that we know need to be corrected that can be fixed almost instantaneously? Because again, when you're playing against a Houston squad that is going to use this as like its Super Bowl, that to me says that when you're going down to the wire, it wasn't that you were close. It's that the fact of the matter is that even with your C-level talent, you should be able to beat teams from lesser tier conferences. That's what I learned last night. And this is not a shot at Houston. Houston had a phenomenal season. They won the game fair and square. They were able to jump up after being down 14-0, and they scored 21 unanswered points going into halftime. Momentum shifted in their side. But still, the fact that this was even close to being a game for a moment says all I need to know about where we are when it came to LSU. So you're going to look at some players. You're going to ask yourself who comes back next year. I think Trey'Dez Green does. I think that DJ Pickett does. I think Treyon Keys does. I think that Harlan Berry does. You got to ask yourself, how do you fix the offensive line? I don't know, but this is the beauty about what is LSU. When run properly, is the best job in college football. And that means when your NIL funds, it means when your boosters, it means when your head coach, it means with your athletic staff are all marginally lined up in the same direction and have a good, clear indication on what we're going to do in the offseason. When that happens, guess what? That shows you that you can take that next jump forward. And I think that you will, because of it's LSU. And they're not going to sit by idly and pay a bunch of money to a coach in Lane Kiffin to leave Oxford to come on in here and then go 9-3 because if he doesn't have a good roster. And again, Lane Kiffin with lesser tier rosters has been able to get to 10 wins on the regular out in Oxford. You give him a better roster, you got to feel pretty good about where you are when it comes to the direction of your team. Doesn't mean that every single piece is going to be back. Doesn't mean that you're not going to have some faults. Doesn't mean that you don't need to upgrade a quarterback. As Michael Van Buren, yeah, we can talk about him having a 3-touchdown day. We can also talk about him having multiple thrown balls. We can talk about him nearly losing the game against Arkansas. We can talk about him quite literally losing the game against Oklahoma. And we can also talk about how horrendous he was for so many other for so many of the moments in a game against, let me remind everybody, a team from the Conference USA, 13-10 win. So it's not like you don't need a quarterback. You definitely do. And there'll be some names out there. I think that Sam Levitt's going to be one that's mentioned. I think that Trayvon Chambliss, if he does enter the portal, is going to be one that's mentioned. And I think that Lane's going to be able to get his hands on the right player and turn this thing around. I do. But last night was a clear visual representation of what we've seen all year from LSU. The constant, careless, neglectful penalties cost you once again in a game to where it felt like you had your shot and you found a way to mess it on up. There'll be a lot of things for Lane Kiffin to change this offseason. As for my final grade on LSU in 2025, it's a straight up D-. I will not give out an F because if you went to a bowl game. I think if you at least do the bare minimum and make a bowl game, you at least deserve to have a D. But our expectations for LSU going into the year were potential Heisman Trophy winner at quarterback, multiple breakout wide receivers, an offensive line that was going to be rebuilt and retooled, a defense that was going to be elite underneath Blake Baker, and a coach that was going to take you to the promised land and maybe even win your first SEC title since 2019. And you did not accomplish any of those things. Your biggest win of the year is probably firing Brian Kelly. That's probably your biggest win of the year. And then if you want to go a step further when it comes to actual on-field wins, maybe it's against South Carolina. Like, maybe. That's probably what I would say, because at least you beat Lenora Sellers. Or you could go with the Florida game because you got 5 turnovers on a quarterback that no longer is playing in Gainesville. Like, you could make that case. But that's your biggest win of the year. You still went to a bowl game. You learned from the error of your ways. You brought in my opinion, the best offensive mind in college football. And now you're going to be able to hit reset. But from expectations going into the year to what it is now, it just really kind of the writing's on the wall. You are a D- team, and there's nothing else to say about that. Comment section: LSU stop making excuses for an SEC team getting beat by a G5 team that was a couple years ago. That was lame for this. I would make excuses if I was talking about a team that had all of its starters out there, that played with multiple pieces of its offensive line, with multiple guys on the defensive line, all of those things. I would have expected that if I reminded everybody that this was what was on the field. That wasn't. Houston also, and by the way, this is something that has bothered the crap out of me. I want to bring this up. You can mention that Houston was a G5 team 2 years ago. When you have the money and the bills to be able to pay for the right players and the right coaches to come on in, who gives a care? Like, who gives a shit? It's about momentum at the right time. And to me, that is where you are when it comes to Houston. Houston went out and they brought in a really good quarterback that fit the system. They brought in 2 coordinators that were better suits than what they had last season. And by the way, the defense coordinator that they lost, Shield Wood, is currently in the second round of the college football playoffs. So pretty damn good defense coordinator. They went and they brought in a lot of good offensive pieces. They upgraded when it came to some defensive names. And they put themselves in a position to where they were able to win on out because of the momentum that they carried. And they were fully healthy in this game. So, yeah, that's not me calling out anything when it comes to that. Great win for the Cougs. It was. How do you build off it long term is going to be the bigger question I have, I think, for Eddie Nunez and for Willie Fritz and company. Cole must not remember that Lane Kiffin went 9-3 with arguably the most talented roster in the country, lost to one SEC team because his girlfriend broke up with him. I do, Lebs. And by the way, that may happen at LSU. That very well could. So I'm not sure that it will. You know, what are we going to see from the changes and the mistakes? Are we going to watch him somehow find a way to underachieve? The beauty about what I've always said about Lane Kiffin is, in a year that you don't expect Lane Kiffin to do much is going to be the year that he strikes gold. Lo and behold, he did. Not many people thought that he'd ever leave for the LSU job because they didn't think it would have been made available this year with how much preseason hype there was. But there was no hype around Ole Miss. So there's no hype around LSU going into next season. Maybe you feel good about it. I personally don't. So that's just my stance on it. I think that he will go 9-3 probably next season, and it won't be good enough for LSU. And LSU will put a lot of pressure on him in year 2. That's just me. LSU should be able to handle business with their 4 deep. This is embarrassing for the SEC. Okay. Constant narrative that needs to be changed here when talking about the SEC. I do this for a living. I do this and I do radio for a living. I got to talk about all 16 teams, SEC teams. I do. If I did not do this, I could give a flying care in the world about any other team in the SEC other than my team. I would. And most SEC fans act that way. This is not an embarrassing loss for the SEC in the eyes of most public fans. This is an embarrassing loss for LSU and only LSU. Because LSU still somehow, with backups on backups on backups, was able to still make it a game against a Houston team that had all of its starters in, and they came all the way down to the wire and they crapped the bed. This has nothing to do with the SEC. The Missouri game, to where you didn't get any great play execution from Ahmad Hardy in the second half, some really questionable decisions made by Eli Drinkowitz. It's a bad loss for Missouri. It's not a bad loss for the SEC, because the other 15 teams around the conference are not sitting here looking at you and saying that, oh, we believe, we believe that this is now going to be a stain on the resume of the SEC. They could care less. They could, and they always will feel that way. In fact, for my money, most people will. I care about this for the SEC because it does terrible for the content. I want to see the SEC win, and I want to see the SEC do better than everyone else because it's great for content purposes. But from a standpoint of just SEC on SEC, nobody here is ever going to say, oh, well, look at how terrible it was for the SEC in this standpoint. Look at how terrible. No, they don't care. They don't. In fact, they're laughing. There are people down in Houston. There are people down in College Station. There are people in Tuscaloosa. There are people in Norman, Oklahoma. They're all pissing themselves, laughing at how embarrassed it must be to lose to a Big 12 team. That's what they're saying. They do not care about what the SEC thinks on this one. They care about what they think about that fan base in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, losing a game and going 7-6 on the year. That's what they think. Lane Kiffin lost to a one SEC team with arguably the most talented roster in the country, because his 25-year-old dumped him. Lebs, I'm not disagreeing with that. And went 9-3 missed playoffs. He did. And he may fail at LSU. He might. I don't know. I do think he is the best offensive play caller in the country. I do think that he is a big reason why Ole Miss was able to turn the corner this past year. I do think that he learned from the error of his ways by having a talented roster and being told in the offseason, we're not giving you the same amount of talent. You got to figure out a way to win without them. I do think all those things are true. I don't know if he'll win a national title at LSU. I don't. I do think that the expectations, when they're set far too high, he crumbles under the pressure. And we've watched this before. You want to bring up the 9-3 season of 2024. How about the year after having your first 11-win season? 10-win season with Matt Corral, and you played Baylor in the Sugar Bowl, and you went right back down to mediocrity, and you went 8-5. Like, that should have been the expectation. You should have been building off of that success, but you didn't. And I think that roster was more talented than the 2021 roster that went and played in the Sugar Bowl. That's my sense. I thought that Jackson Dart was a far superior quarterback prospect than Matt Corral. That's just me. But again, when the expectations are put too high for Lane, somehow he crumbles under the pressure. And we've seen this before. We saw it at USC. We saw it when he was at Alabama as the offense coordinator. We saw it at Ole Miss. What happened for him at LSU? I don't know. I do think that he will make the college football playoff at least a couple times. I do think that he will win a playoff game there. I don't know if he'll win a national title, but I don't have that data point to say he's ever been able to do it. Why are you making this about the SEC? This is about LSU. Again, this is about LSU. LSU was such a disastrous team this year, and yet still with backups on backups on backups on backups went out, and they played up to a certain standard against a Houston team that was treated like it was its freaking Super Bowl. They came back in, and they end up losing the game by 3, and you go back and you ask yourself, well, what went wrong? Well, how about a pass interference call on third down that led to a touchdown drive to Amari Thomas? How about giving them a free set of downs on third down when it was 3rd and 4? How about you setting yourself back with a false start penalty on the offensive line? How about giving up 4 sacks on the night? How about not being able to run the football efficiently? How about Frank Wilson taking out Marlon Berry, their best running back, and saying, we're not going to trust him because he fumbled the ball? How about all those things? Because that's not on Houston. That's on LSU. Doing what it's done all year. Underachieving at every single level in constant positions where they knew that they could win this game, and instead the self-inflicted wounds decided to appear at the wrong time. That was it. That was it. That's what we have seen all season from LSU, and it appeared once again, even when going up against a team that had really everything to fight for, and you were just kind of going through the motions. You lose by 3, and you lose by 3 because of your ineptitude that has been on display week in and week out, probably since week 1, but certainly since the loss to Vanderbilt. That was the year that LK was flirting with Auburn and completely lost focus. Told him he actually worked this year. Okay, Lebs. He didn't have the same expectations going into the year. Lebs, do me a favor. And we're going to end the live stream in a minute. What were your expectations for Ole Miss this season? I'll tell you mine. I thought they were going to be a 9-3 team. I thought they'd be a 9-3 roster. Pretty good with Austin Simmons as the starting quarterback. I loved Austin Simmons. I'm not even going to try to deny that. And they would probably lose to LSU. I think I said Oklahoma. And I think that I said, who's the last thing I said? I think I said Georgia. Yeah, those are three. 9-3 would have been a fine year for Ole Miss's standards. But it wouldn't have been 11-1 and you playing in the college football playoff and hosting a playoff game for the first time in program history. That wouldn't be the case. So in a year where the expectations were low, as they were this season, coming off of a year that you went 10-3 with a roster that was uber talented, arguably the best that's ever come through Ole Miss, and you lose to Florida, and you lose to Kentucky, and you lose to LSU, and in one of those games, you should have never lost because it's Kentucky. They're bad. And you never trailed in the LSU game until you end up losing it to a Kyron Lacy touchdown pass. And an implosion of all implosions in the fourth quarter that came from Jackson Dart. You were very much still in the race for a college football playoff bid if you don't lose one of them. But you did. And then this season, you bring in a Fair State quarterback, a bunch of transfers that not many people were high profiled. You lose ample talent on the defensive line. People probably think that you were just going to be a 8-4, 7-5, at best 9-3 team. And that's not the expectations for a Lane Kiffin led roster, nor should it be. And they overexceeded. Because when the pressure's not on to deliver, when the pressure's not on from the public spotlight early in the season, Lane Kiffin kills it. He does. Killed it in 2021 when they went to a 10-win season. Killed it when they brought in Spencer Sanders. And then they said, we're competing alongside, him and Jackson Dart. And they get their first 11-win campaign and they win the Peach Bowl. And then we see what we just saw, this past season where Trinidad Chambliss comes in out of nowhere and should have been in the Heisman Trophy conversation a lot longer. Like all things that occurred. And they didn't. But Lane in years where we don't expect anything from him delivers. Lane in years where we expect something from him does not. And that's just my 2 cents of the word. Lebs, I'll let you get your comment in before we get on out of here. By the way, we have a live stream tomorrow around noon, if I'm not mistaken. We will be previewing the 2 matchups for the SEC. Ole Miss versus Georgia in the Sugar Bowl. Alabama versus Indiana in the Rose Bowl. We'll be giving out grades for LSU and Missouri. And also we will be breaking down the news surrounding South Carolina and who they were able to retain. Plus, more news coming out with the transfer portal. Who are some names they need to target, names you got to know. So before we do that, and before we end the live stream, let me tell you about my friends over at FANDUEL.com/SECU is the perfect place to sign on up. Make sure that you go ahead and lock yourself in with $300 in bonus bets simply by winning your first $5 bet. The app is free, simple, easy to use. Sign up today at FANDUEL.com/SECU. Final score coming out of Houston as the Cougars end up getting a 10-win campaign. 38, LSU 35. The season of misery, the year that needs to be burned in the public record books down in Baton Rouge, is finally over. And now the Lane Kiffin era has begun. Laney got a lot of work to do because there's some talent on this team that is probably going to take it to the next level. And there's some talent that once again will keep you at 7-6, and you will return for a third straight year to the Kinder's Texas Bowl. Only this time, now you're batting 500. You want to be able to hit the over. We'll talk to you guys tomorrow. Have a good rest of your Sunday. Peace.